I'm just bending the wire around, making sure that there's no breaks in the wire, that if we bend it, it loses the connection. And it seems like it's okay. So I'm gonna give the power adapter an okay here. So we're going to have to assume it's something on the inside of the computer, probably the power jack. When we plug the power adapter into the computer, these gateways usually have a battery light, a purple light that lights up, and there's no light there. So something's wrong. See, their lights are off. We would have seen a purple light if that was working okay. And a purple sticker on the bottom shows that Best Buy worked on this thing, so hopefully there's still some hope for the machine. Take the battery out, try it again, just to make sure. Try to power it on. Still nothing. We're jiggling the power cord as we do this, jiggling the power adapter. Sometimes if you jiggle it, it makes a connection. Sometimes it doesn't on some computers, and that'll at least let you know that the power jack is bad. I'm constantly pressing the button as I'm jiggling around. Still no power, so let's open this thing up, take a look at the power jack, and see if there's anything wrong with it there. Now this computer is awfully dirty, and I really like to work on laptops that are clean. So I always try to clean them as I take them apart or before I take them apart. If it's so dirty, sometimes I just clean them before I even start working on them, just so I could see the screen, I could touch the keys without feeling grossed out. And what I do is I take a monitor wipe. I actually clean the screen first with the monitor wipe. Then I use that same monitor wipe and just go over the rest of the computer. Those monitor wipes are actually great for removing dirt and grime. They used to be alcohol-based. I don't know what they use now, but it's a good substance or solvent, whatever they use in there, that it does a good job of cleaning. And then if there's lots of chunks under the keyboard, I'll take a wet dry vac with the brush attachment and just brush over the keyboard, get all the chunks out from under it. You can't really see from this angle or this close how much stuff is really gunked in there, but I think there's a lot of junk under the keyboard that I'm sucking out there. Okay, nice and clean. At least we have the outside clean. Now we'll probably clean the insides as we take it apart. Now there's a plate under this computer that covers the RAM, the processor, and the wireless. No, just RAM and the processor. And we're going to take that plate off first and get those components out. We just want to start taking components out of the machine. Anytime we want to work on a motherboard, we just want to detach all components from the motherboard that we possibly can right off the bat. Because if we don't, those components might stop us from getting to the motherboard. There might be somebody screwing it in, or there might be screws hidden underneath the RAM, or the heatsink on the processor might be causing the motherboard to be stuck. So there we go. We could pull the heatsink and fan out in one shot, detach the fan from the motherboard. Let's take the RAM out. Take the hard drive out. And then take this cover off, which will expose the wireless card. And on this particular gateway, to get the keyboard off, you got to get to a screw under that particular panel. It's kind of a tricky little screw there, but I'll show it to you later. Actually, I'm taking it out right now. This is the screw that's holding a keyboard in. You would never know it. There's no markings. And this other screw is the other screw that's holding the keyboard in. Just because I've taken apart so many of these, I know to get those out first. Otherwise, the keyboard will not come off. Now I'm taking off the screws that are holding on that front, I call it the hinge cover plate. It's the plate that's right above the keyboard and right under the screen. And it basically gives you access to the keyboard and the screen. And since I'm right here, I'm just taking the 2 screws out of the back of the computer. Sometimes there's screws in the back of the computer holding in the hinges that keep the screen on. So let's get those out. And there's this one screw here that's holding in the DVD drive. Once we get that screw out, push on the tab, DVD drive pops out. And this drive is damaged, there's no front cover. You can actually see water damage there, that's not a good sign. So hopefully there's not major damage done to this motherboard. But always look for water damage, white spots on the board or on the hardware. Okay, I'm just taking a look at the processor there. Going to leave the processor on for now. It's not really in the way. And I'm going to get a Phillips out, or a straight edge screwdriver, I'm sorry. And pull under the hinge there. And pop that hinge cover plate off. Now we unscrewed those screws from the bottom, so now we know that there's no screws holding it in from the bottom. So we could apply a little bit of pressure here, knowing that it will come off. And actually there was no screws holding it in, but it's always better to be safe. Swing that keyboard out. You'll see that there's 2 posts under that keyboard. There's actually more than 2 that hold that keyboard in. And we luckily took those screws out, which I showed you before. Now let's get the wireless cables out there, and then the LCD cable. Those wireless cables are the antenna that go to the top of the screen, and then they feed through to the wireless card. They're always a pain, those wireless antenna, but they try to get them up to the highest point on the laptop they can to give you better reception. And then there's a couple screws here just holding the hinges in for the screen. Oops. Oops again. Sometimes when I rush, I drop that screwdriver, so. Let's pull that screen right off. I love them when I get the screen off, then I don't have to worry about the thing. It's a bulky, unwieldy thing having that screen on, so it really allows you to work good on the laptop after that's off. Now there's a few more screws. And that's a normal size screw on this laptop. Almost all the screws are that same size, so we don't have to worry too much about where we put them. Let's just throw them all into one big pile. Okay, just check if there's any other screws holding the top plate on. One more over there. Let's detach the ribbon cable from the touchpad. There we go. Now we don't have to worry about breaking that cable when we take the top cover off of the bottom cover. And then let's hit all the remaining screws on the bottom here. One thing you might want to try if you want to speed up your repairs is to get an electric screwdriver. But I am very partial to this tiny one I have here that I've been using on laptops for about 2 years now, probably. Same screwdriver. And it does the job fast enough for me. Now my screwdriver's losing a little bit of magnetic force, so I'm just take a magnet, which I believe came out of a speaker. I don't remember where I got that magnet. And scratch that screwdriver onto that magnet and recharge the magnetic force. Okay, let's just make sure we get all the screws out. We're going to attempt to lift the top cover from the bottom cover. And if there's no screws holding it in, all will come off very easy. And there is a screw that we missed. Just taking my fingernail, I'm just pressing it in between the two covers there to pry off the front. I'm just checking the computer for corrosion. It looks like something did spill in there with that discoloration on the top cover. Now let's just take a look here. Look under these. Always look under that sticky black plastic if you could get it off. See if there's anything that got under there, any water, moisture. You'll see white spots of corrosion if there is. I'm looking at the power jack there. Just want to determine what the problem is with this motherboard. If it's fried or is it just a power jack problem. So we're going to take the motherboard out. And there's 4 screws here that hold in this motherboard. All on the left side. So you pull out all those screws on the left side. Then just lift up the left side of the motherboard. I was playing air drums there for some reason. And then, because I'm talking to my dad as I'm doing this, but you don't hear the muted original footage. And you pull up the left side of the motherboard. That allows you to pull the right side up. And then there's that one cable there. You got to get off the motherboard. Pull that off. Motherboard is free. Now we're able to throw it down there and look to see what's going on with this thing. Take this opportunity to clean it up. Get the paintbrush. Gets all the dust out. Take a look under that black plastic if you suspect there's any water, moisture, or corrosion under there. Looks okay. Okay, now I'm interested in the power jack. If there's any points on the motherboard where the power jack's not making a connection or there might be a loose connection. And I believe there is. I'm going to try to get it in focus for the camera. And there's a spot right there at the end of my finger where the positive pin is coming through the motherboard and not making a strong connection to the bottom. So, and these gateways are tricky because there's also a point at the top, and a bad USB port on this one actually, but there's a point at the top of the power jack 2 that needs to be resoldered. And as you can see, the USB port's bad too. So the USB port's damaged. We don't want that to short out. That could cause a power problem as well. So we're going to pull off that USB port. Not even going to try to repair it. It's really loose, and there's definitely damage to the plastic inside the USB port. And they're a little too specialized to do repairs on, so that baby's going to come off. Three of the 4 connections on that USB port were already torn apart, so we just got to get that one last one off, and then we'll be okay. He's got a couple other USB ports he could use, and he can always use a USB hub. Just Just taking the old toothbrush there, again a non-used one if possible, and just making sure everything's clean off the motherboard in that spot. There's no short circuit. Nothing was scratched or damaged. And I got the soldering iron out and a little file. And what I'm going to do is scratch a spot on the surface of the motherboard where I'm going to attach some solder and run a wire to the power jack. Basically, I'm going to bypass the original connection the power jack is making with the motherboard and instead replace it with a wire. And again, I use a wire because wire has flexibility, and these power jacks get bumped around a lot. And if you have a brittle connection, it's very likely that brittle connection is going to break if somebody impacts that power jack or somebody trips over the power cord while it's plugged in. So by using a wire, we're going to bypass the original circuitry and use our own method here, which will allow flexibility. And I'm taking a little piece of red wire, stripping off the ends, as you can see there. And then I'm going to attach some solder to each end of that wire. I'm going to solder it to the motherboard and connect it to the power jack. Now in this particular gateway, we have to do this on the bottom and top of the motherboard because there's 2 points of connection. Now you're going to see here this little spot that I filed out once it comes in focus. It's a little tiny spot right above where it says D1 towards the top of that board there. And I picked that spot because if you look directly to the right of that spot, that is where the power jack, the pin for the power jack, comes through the motherboard. So we know that that's the positive connection on the motherboard. And you can see a little bit where that positive pin is loose, and that's why I'm going to create a little divot right next to that positive pin. I'm going to use a wire, and I'm going to wire the wire directly to the back of the power jack. And that's going to replace the existing technology that's in there, which I think is faulty. This little device I just pulled out that's holding the wire is called helping hands. You should definitely have one of those for your shop. And we're going to pull out the solder here, and we're going to solder some solder to each end of that wire. Now the soldering iron has been plugged in for a while, so it's hot. And we're going to take the soldering iron here and just melt a little bit of solder on each end of that wire. This is the technique I like to do. Like I said, I'm not a soldering professional, but this is what works for me. I like to coat each connection that I'm going to work with some solder, and then afterwards, after I get all the connections set up, I just attach 2 connections together, melt the solder together, and it makes a good solid connection. Now I'm taking some solder and I'm putting it on the motherboard, right on that spot that I filed out. And I'll show a close-up to the camera once I'm done this. Now you don't want the exposed connections at the end of that wire to be too long, otherwise they might short circuit with something else on the motherboard. You want to keep them short. You can't really see exactly what I'm doing here, but I'll show a close-up to the camera. I'm just soldering that little red wire to the spot on the motherboard where I filed out, a spot where I could solder. And I'm just trying to be exact here. I like to be precise, and I want to make sure that that wire is not short-circuiting with anything else.